I feel like in medical school, our professors and things do a great job of trying to teach us how to take those comprehensive health histories and getting the religious and the social histories and things like that. And I've noticed as we move along through our profession, we tend to lose a little bit of that because we're so in a crunch for time and we're just trying to move quickly and get through the day. But we lose a little bit of that human touch to it, where we're asking about their personal lives and their spiritual beliefs and things that affect their healthcare decisions outside of literally just their healthcare, right?
Welcome back to the Pursuit of Health podcast, where this time we dive into a subject that has implications across all aspects of our field and our healthcare system, and that is the diversity of healthcare providers. In this time, we're going to sit down with a bright young student of medicine, Dr. Simal Ali, who talks about her perspectives as a Muslim American entering the field and her views about why diversity matters, with some very wonderful descriptions of the simple ideas that we can do to make this much better based on her work. So please sit down with me and enjoy this wonderful conversation, and I hope it leads to a lot of your own conversations about this topic as we sit down with Dr. Simal Ali. So welcome back, everyone, after an extended hiatus for many reasons, professionally and otherwise. We're back to discuss a topic which has come up over and over in our news and in our field and in our lives here in America. And that's the discussion about diversity in our lives, personally and professionally. And we're honored to be able to do so with a young colleague of mine, Simal Ali, who is a third-year medical student at the Touro College of Osteopathic Medicine. And we've had a lot of discussions offline here about why this is important, and particularly taking it from the angle of the Muslim American who is looking towards a career and has participated in our health care system, and why these ideas are important. We're very excited because this fabric that we call the American quilt, this collage of who we are, we're wrestling in so many different ways with how this comes together and how we actually respect this, promote this, and after many hundreds of years start to really appreciate it and hopefully make it what it could be. So we'd like to welcome you, Simal, to this
Thank you.
Episode here. We're very excited to kick off this part of this discussion because I think it really does fall into the pursuit of health very nicely with the idea particularly of our American culture and that sense of who we are. So again, welcome.
Thank you.
And if you would, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what your passion has been in terms of this topic and discussion lately, because that's how this all got kicked off.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Fetke. I'm very excited to be here. So a little bit about myself. I am a third-year medical student at Touro. I grew up in Philadelphia. I went to undergrad at Drexel University. I am a first-generation medical student in my family, so it's something that I've wanted to be forever. For as long as I can remember, I've wanted to be a doctor. I don't know exactly what got it in my head, but I know people have told me forever, oh, you'd be a great doctor. And I guess that just stuck with me, I stayed the path. As someone who is Muslim American, I've always thought over the years, what can I do as a physician to contribute to the representation, right, of my people? How can I improve healthcare by bringing my own culture, my own beliefs, and helping people just feel a little bit more represented in medicine? I remember growing up, I always wished I had teachers and mentors and just people in the community who looked like me and, believed the same things as me. And I think I would have been so inspired by that. But unfortunately, I didn't grow up in a community like that. I grew up in a pretty non-diverse suburban town just outside of Philadelphia, like I said, where I was the only hijab-wearing Muslim student in my entire school district. And
Did you find yourself constantly, therefore, kind of answering questions of your friends?
Yeah, absolutely. Offline we were talking about why I started wearing the hijab. And one of the reasons was that as I was starting high school, I felt, I'm someone who's able to talk to people pretty comfortably, anyone who wants to ask questions about Islam. And I felt by putting on the hijab, by wearing this headscarf, people would recognize me as a Muslim person and they would feel a little bit more comfortable being able to approach Simal like, oh, Simal, I know her. Yeah, she's Muslim. Like I can ask her anything. And I know sometimes that comes with the ups and downs of questions that, some others might find offensive. But to me personally, I'm just excited that someone cares and wants to know more.
So they knew you as a person first.
Exactly.
And then at some point in your young life, you said, I'm going to make this a visual and make a statement. And from what you told me, that was in 2011.
Yeah. Just a little, I guess 11 years now of wearing the hijab and haven't looked back a single day.
And explain to our audience a little bit about the philosophy or the concept of a hijab. Because again, I think one of the things that plagues us is a lot of misconceptions along the way about the Muslim faith, about Islam, and about some of the things we kind of hear for other reasons with biases. So explain the philosophy of this, because I thought that was very important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, the Islamic definition of a hijab is essentially the behavior and the action of both dressing and acting modestly. And it applies to both men and women. Though I think it's more important for us to really just recognize the Western definition of the hijab, which is essentially a head covering worn by Muslim women. Now, depending on where you grew up and how many Muslims you've interacted with in your life, you may have seen a few different types of head coverings. The most traditional option, which is what I'm wearing today, is the hijab that covers your head and neck area. There's more modest options called the niqab or the burqa, which tend to cover not only your head and neck, but also your face, leaving just your eyes exposed, and some options that also cover your eyes. But if you were to see any of those women on the street and you said they were a hijab wearer, you'd be correct because they're practicing a form of hijab.
So the idea of being humble and humility, something that kind of is in Western medicine, at least with some of my colleagues over the years and co-students as I was training, and still is kind of counterintuitive to the way we think sometimes of physicians who are aggressive and really out there and, not necessarily humble, though I would advocate that that's a very important skill set to be humble as a physician. You're saying this is built into the Muslim faith in many ways.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an expectation that's set for us. That's how we're expected to act. And one of the reasons I put on the hijab is because not only do I get to act as a walking, talking billboard as a representation for Islam, but I'm a reminder to myself each and every day of what kind of a person I should be when I go out into the world. Am I kind? Am I humble? Am I modest? Am I acting in the way that represents a good Muslim person, a person of belief, right? And for me, it's always just been important to try to have that reminder for myself. And now, obviously, I put on the scarf in the morning unconsciously, but it's still something as I go out into the world, speaking with kindness, speaking in a way that's respectful to others. And I think especially in healthcare, it gives you a softer touch. You remember why you go into it each and every day for that reason.
Absolutely. And I think as you kind of bore witness to this, you've done so in a very public way. You've been speaking about this. Tell us a little bit about your speaking and why you've even, while you're studying and doing all the stuff that we do to understand the basic science and stuff, you've also found it important to be a public advocate and go out and speak about this. So tell us why that's important to you and perhaps some of the experiences you've had doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So about just over a year ago, I offered to give a presentation at my medical school about, caring for the Muslim patient from a hijabi's perspective. So clinical considerations that I think are applicable, not really only for our Muslim patients, but really patients of all faiths, just, how to give good, culturally competent care. And of course, I'm giving this from the perspective of a medical student. I don't know everything, but I can give some firsthand experiences. So as I was preparing for that talk, I actually began speaking with a lot of members of the Muslim community. I started asking on Facebook and Instagram and, wherever I could get information from people to provide personal stories of experiences that they've had in healthcare as a Muslim individual that made them uncomfortable or that they wish had been handled differently. And it was through their stories that I've kind of crafted this lecture that, I go through their experiences and what are the solutions to those scenarios? When someone is asked in their doctor's office, oh, you're going to see, a new male doctor you've never met before, and there's also going to be a male student in there, and you need to get into a paper thin gown and take off your hijab. And, what do you do in that scenario? How can we handle it differently or better? Or for the patients who...
We as physicians.
Yeah, as clinicians.
Be sensitive culturally to this.
Absolutely. It's our job. It's our responsibility. It's not only our job to, help care for someone in a medical sense, but also to respect them and to make sure they feel like they're getting the care that they deserve without having, the misconceptions and the judgments thrown their way. They deserve that.
And it already can see the implications of this approach to other cultures and other people, and in everything from gender to religion to race. Just be more sensitive to that patient. And you're saying, look, I can tell you about it from this angle, but it has implications more broadly as well.
Absolutely. I mean, when we don't provide culturally and religiously sensitive healthcare, it can lead to patient distrust of their physician or their healthcare team. It makes them not want to share the information that we really need their help in obtaining from them. It leads to patient treatment plans that, we feel like the patient's being incompliant with, but in reality, we never ask them, is this plan something that's going to work with them or something that they feel is doable, right?
So on a practical basis, would you advocate something as simple as saying, is there anything I should know, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, before we do this? This is what I usually do. Is that going to be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. We should be doing that. I feel like in medical school, our professors and things do a great job of trying to teach us how to take those comprehensive health histories and getting the religious and the social histories and things like that. And I've noticed as we move along through our profession, we tend to lose a little bit of that because we're so in a crunch for time and, we're just trying to move quickly and get through the day. But we lose a little bit of that human touch to it where we're asking about their personal lives and their spiritual beliefs and things that affect their healthcare decisions outside of literally just their healthcare, right? Yeah. And I think it's extremely important to always put the ball back in the patient's court and say, hey, is there anything I can do to make you a little bit more comfortable today? Is there anything we can provide for you that would help better deliver your care today? Anything like that. We should be asking those questions. And I think it'll lead to situations where not only the patients are more satisfied, but we'll feel more satisfied.
Oh my God, the conversation will be so much more open and obviously productive in that sense. I find it's, again, I always respect the nurses in our field. And I often find it's my nurses who will give me that little heads up before I go in the room. Hey, so-and-so, you should know about them and this. And they seem to have that natural skill in nursing to be sensitive that way. And, if they know that the doctor is going to be open to it, they'll give them the heads up, where if they know the doctor is not going to pay attention to that, then they kind of just won't waste their time with it. But I think that's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't keep our minds open. So if we step back a little bit, tell us a little bit, about some of the tenets of the Muslim faith that may impact health. What are some of the beliefs about health that, in that sense, step back, tell us a little bit about that so we're more aware of these things, that if we have a patient of Muslim background, that again could apply to other patients, but particularly what are some of the things that have come up in your discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for this question. It's obviously a huge topic, so I'd like to talk about a few different kind of areas that are applicable to your Muslim patients. Ultimately, I just want to preface this by saying that I think any and all of your patients will be appreciative if you approach each of them with that sense of acceptance and understanding and willingness to learn and be accommodating, that you're already making so much progress, right? So even if you don't remember anything I talk about today, if you go in and you try to understand what your patient wants, you're already making big progress. So yeah, to review some of the basic tenets of Islam that are relevant to clinical medicine, the first thing I'd like to talk about is consuming halal. So halal is an Arabic word that simply means lawful or permissible. Now, it's used to describe food and meat products and cosmetics and also medications. Now, in general, a food is considered halal unless it's specifically prohibited by the Quran.
And many of us will mispronounce it, obviously, and call it hilal.
Hilal, yeah, it's halal, Halal. And it's funny, I always mention that for a lot of people, when you hear that word halal, they think of a platter of chicken over rice because the only thing they've ever seen is a halal cart. Yeah. Right. And obviously that is a halal meal, but there's a little bit more to it than that. The reason why it's so relevant to medicine is because there's ingredients in medications that sometimes your Muslim patients will not want to take, right? So the 3 ingredients that I want you to remember is alcohol, pork, and gelatin. If you know that your Muslim patients typically avoid these 3 ingredients because they're prohibited in their faith, then you're already making big progress. So now I know you're thinking alcohol, pork, and gelatin. Well, I haven't really heard of any bacon-flavored medications, so what are you talking about? Well, here's the thing. There's a lot of medications that are very common, like our gel capsule medications. There's heparins and insulins that are porcine-derived, which means pork-derived. And so this can be concerning for your Muslim patients. Now, it's not always the case where we are identifying the Muslim patient and saying, oh, they might not want to take this medicine. Often enough, it's actually them who come to us and tell us, hey, like I actually read up on that medicine you tried to prescribe me. I don't want to take it for this reason. Now, at this point, you have to know, okay, what do I do to accommodate them, right? So the 2 things that you can do is either go to the expert, call down to the pharmacy and see what kind of alternatives they have, because obviously they're the experts. We should ask them. And usually they will be able to offer suggestions. Like, for example, sometimes it's as simple as instead of giving someone a vitamin D2 gel capsule, 50,000 units, you can switch it out for a vitamin D3, just regular capsule. That's not like gelatin based. And it's a simple switch like that. And our pharmacy friends know all those simple switches, or at least can recommend them to us.
I almost have this sense of when we go to a restaurant and somebody's saying, are there any restrictions or allergies?
Yes.
They do that in a restaurant.
Yes.
And how hard is that? We all appreciate that, right?
Exactly. Even when you asked me what I wanted for dinner today, I was so happy that you had asked if I had any restrictions. I was like, wow, that was really kind. But yeah, absolutely. So asking our pharmacy friends is one option. Or if you want to do the work yourself, what you can look up is the excipients in a medicine. So excipients, it's a fancy word I learned from my pharmacy friends, essentially is just all that extra stuff that's in the medicine aside from the active ingredients. So all the fillers, like the gels and things like that, all the extra stuff that carries the active medicine. So typically when you're looking at the medication list, you want to see if the excipients lists the source of gelatin, for example. So if you see that it's a pork-derived gelatin, your Muslim patient likely won't want to take it.
And that'll be clear on the box.
On the box, the manufacturer's page, it's a quick Google search, really, looking up the excipients. But if you're looking up the ingredients and it says that the gelatin is cellulose-derived, which is plant-based, then it's okay. You don't have to worry. Your Muslim patients will most likely be happy to take that medicine. So that's one area, consuming halal. Yeah, right? It's so simple, too. It's not very difficult to make that switch. Yeah. Now, the next big area I want to talk about is practicing modesty, as I was speaking about the hijab. And as I said, it's something, modesty is something that's applicable to both men and women, right? So these considerations are really for all of our patients. Now, one of the first things you can do when your patient first arrives to the clinic is ask them, would you prefer to have a provider of your preferred gender? Now, whatever they choose, right? And maybe your patient says, no, I don't have a preference. And that's great. All right, step 1, out of the way. Next, you can ask your patients, both male and female, if they would like to have a chaperone in the room. Now, often we only do this with patients who, when they're getting like a pelvic exam or something a little bit more intimate, we bring in a chaperone.
That's intrinsic to pediatrics in my field, but
yes,
an adult, not necessarily.
Not necessarily. And it's just nice and thoughtful to ask. And sometimes your patients might feel a little bit more comfortable having a chaperone. Next, you can explain to the patient why the physical exam is necessary and what areas you might want to uncover during it, and what areas will need to be exposed. You're allowing them to just mentally prepare, because as you know, when you think about a Muslim patient, especially like a female who does practice the hijab and she dresses modestly, she's wearing the scarf, to be seen by, for example, like a male provider and a male medical student, a male PA student, whoever it is in the room, and being asked to get into that paper thin gown that offers the next to nothing coverage and, take off your hijab for the exam, that can be really like scary and traumatizing and just a horrific thing for some people because they've never been so exposed. And to have to do that in the presence of strangers can put them in a mindset where they're not even able to focus on the rest of the visit because they're just recovering from what happened to them. And, for a lot of us, we don't think of the physical exam as such an intimate thing, but for some people it can be.
And sometimes what happens because of that, I see that in my female patients, the doctors will just not do the full exam.
Yeah, a proper, good physical exam.
Of
Yep.
course, that is fraught with problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, let's say if you think that your patient can keep on their clothes, but just kind of adjust them as you go throughout the physical exam, like, oh, would you be willing to lift your shirt? Perfect. That's probably the more comfortable option. If you do feel that they need to get into a gown, I highly recommend offering them at least 2 gowns or as many as they really need. Usually what I do when I'm a patient and I have to get into a gown is I'll throw one on the normal way where the back is open, and then I'll put on a second one so my back is also covered. And then we adjust as we need to do throughout the exam. Now, again, like as you're doing the physical exam, talk through it, explain to the patient what you're listening for, what you're looking for. And this is something that they teach us in medical school from the start.
Absolutely.
I'm pressing down on your abdomen. I'm looking for any masses or things. I never see that in practice where that's being explained to the patient.
A whole nother topic of discussion. We learn and why we drop it. Yes.
Unfortunately. And again, I think it goes back to that crunch time, like we have so many patients to see, we want to get through it as fast and efficiently as possible, but it's these little things that we do that I think patients really appreciate and it makes them feel seen and heard and respected, And as I said, ultimately just be gentle, be patient, and ask what their preference is. Do not assume what works for one patient is going to work for your next patient.
Applicable to everyone.
Everyone, absolutely. Now, the next big area I want to get into is fasting during the month of Ramadan. So Ramadan's actually coming up. It's about a month away. Now, the purpose of Ramadan is essentially to practice self-control and establish good habits. So if you've ever heard, it takes about 21 days to build a good habit, and Ramadan is 30 days long, so it's perfect. During this month, Muslims are fasting from before dawn to sunset. And during this time, they're abstaining from food, from water, from gum, from smoking, sexual activity, or even taking medicines, even if they're dry swallowing them without having to drink water after. Now, there are people who are excused from fasting. Now, this includes people who are elderly and can't fast safely, or children before they've hit puberty, or those who are pregnant or nursing mothers, those who are menstruating, and those who are traveling. These people are excused from fasting. Now, why this is relevant to medicine is because patients who have chronic diseases, right? So even like our type 2 diabetics who need to take their medicines at a controlled, scheduled time, or people who are pregnant, while they can be excused, some of them might choose to fast that year. Maybe they're not as far along in their pregnancy and it's still safe for them to do so. These patients might struggle with that decision and they're trying to figure out, is it okay for me to fast? Am I able to fast? And they're really thinking about, what kind of medications do I need to be taking? My doctor told me I have to take this 3 times a day. Will I be able to fast otherwise? So it's really important for us as providers just to be aware of what Ramadan is, what our patients are doing during this month, how they're fasting. So that way we can have that conversation if they come to us and are asking, hey doc, can I fast? And you'll be able to say like, oh, you know what? I usually have you take your medicine 3 times a day. Why don't you switch it to only taking it before and after your fast or with your meals? So before you start your fast and once you break your fast or however it is. And this is great because ultimately our job isn't to stop anyone from doing what they want to do, right? Our job as their providers is to figure out how we can help them do what they love and do it in a way that they're still staying healthy and safe.
And especially when it comes to things like, expecting another child, the mother wants to do everything they can.
Absolutely.
They don't want to feel to do something that's harmful. So if there's a medical reason, the ability to be sensitive to that and help guide that parent's decision is, I think, going to help them be more at peace with if they have to break fast or if they have to do something. At least then we help them justify that in their own spirit and own mind.
Absolutely. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to be able to talk to our patients and explain to them, maybe if they are making a decision that we're worried isn't so safe for them, kind of explaining to them our perspective, right? So our job ultimately is to ensure safety, to keep them protected.
Without judgment.
Without judgment. And that's what our patients are looking for always, I think.
Absolutely. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and we discussed this a little bit, is coming lately, and I would say over the past 20 years or so, there's been a lot of negative vibes about Muslim culture and some misconceptions and misinformation for many reasons, which is not the scope of this discussion, but the impact that has since 9/11, since the past few years in terms of our immigration and other aspects of our society here in America that have created a very negative impact and kind of promoted and pushed even further some of the misunderstandings or the myths behind Muslim culture and Muslim life. One of them, for example, we talked about briefly was the role of the women in the Muslim culture. The sense that, we've got to protect the women in those parts of the world, us America, because they're, basically mistreated all across the board. Like that's something that is part of Islam. And it's like that kind of has pervaded. I think you've asked a lot of people, they would say, yeah, that's true. But having traveled and talked, that's not the case at all
No,
about
not
the
at all.
Quran or that culture.
Not
so
at
please
all.
clarify some of the misconceptions or myths that maybe get in the way of some of the work that you're trying to do.
Sure, sure. There are a lot of misconceptions about women in Islam. And, I think one of the most beautiful things about our faith is that it is the first one that ever gave women rights, right? People only got voting rights, like women only got voting rights in the United States a few decades ago, right? Women have had them forever. When it comes to marriage, women are given the first rights, right? Like, are they protected in their marriage? Will they be, God forbid, if someone has to get a divorce or their husband will leave them or, whatever it is.
I even saw this in the tea ceremonies in Morocco.
Yeah.
It's all based on the daughter.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely. There's a lot of protection for the women. They're cared for. Even the hijab, right? I talked about what is the hijab, but when do we wear it? We wear it in front of any male who's not a part of our immediate family. So we're not wearing it in front of our fathers, our brothers, or our husbands or children. But we do wear it in front of, strangers and things like that. And why is that? It's protecting our modesty. We're protecting it for ourselves. We're reserving it for those who we love, right? Like we're protecting our beauty and our modesty. And that's the level of respect we uphold for women in Islam, like, right? Like our first leaders in the Islamic faith were women who accepted Islam, who helped the prophets back then, peace be upon them, to further their movements and, accept Islam and spread it and protect the women of those communities. Because even then, back then, prior to Islam, women weren't being treated properly. But when the revelations came and, the word was being spread, that's when women started being treated kindly and
We're
with
talking,
respect.
by the way, thousands of years ago.
Yes,
We're
thousands.
We're talking, some of these cultures 600, 700, 800, AD and before. And that goes in terms of what we're talking about in the healthcare field as well, to education.
Yeah, absolutely. Education for women is an issue all around the world, right? When a woman is educated, she's able to not only care for herself, but she's able to care for her children. She's able to care for the members of her community and create a home and a family in this community, right? And that's something that's so valued in Islam. Like growing up, the concept of getting married or anything like that wasn't a discussion in my house. The concept of being a young, educated woman, super important in my household. That's all my family cared about. Simal has nothing else to focus on other than her education. That's what they wanted for me. And I'm very grateful for it. Not everyone's always that fortunate, but I'm very grateful for it.
And I think it, again, is a misconception that a lot of Americans have, that women don't have an equal role in those communities and in those countries where the Muslim faith is, so intrinsic to the culture. Even being in Morocco, seeing the medical school, the original degree, perhaps in the whole world, was handed out in Morocco, in Fez, by a school started by a woman.
By a Muslim woman, yep, that's exactly right. Isn't that beautiful?
It was just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And then it just erased all those misconceptions. Like, as an American white male, I'm going, wait a second. I have to relearn all this. Something's not right. I've
Yeah.
been told something different. And I think that's important. So what other kind of things perhaps get in the way or create problems for Muslim American students and physicians that are these misconceptions or myths that make it more difficult? Give us some examples of the kind of biases and problems that we should be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a great topic to get into because it is something that can be problematic for both clinicians and patients, right? So if a clinician or a provider happens to be Muslim, that might cause the patient who is not familiar with the faith or the practice to be distrustful of their provider. And this automatically, unfortunately, hinders a really fantastic relationship between patient and provider.
So basically the idea, I don't want
Yeah.
a Muslim physician as my doctor.
Yeah.
Just period, don't want to touch them. That happens.
It happens. Absolutely. I've heard stories. I've been fortunate where I haven't had any scenarios that were too bad. Occasionally I've gotten some questions, but after I've explained or answered, they're often more than willing to have my care or, allow me to be a part of their team. But I have heard stories where, people have straight up asked my clinician friends, don't your people want to kill my people? What a scary thing to walk into an office visit and have someone say that when you've spent the last decade, maybe 2 decades of your life training for this moment so that you can care for these people. But their impression of you is so misguided.
And how hurtful.
Hurtful, of course, of
Very
course.
human level.
Yeah.
And I think from what my own research has said is that the Muslim American community, physicians in particular, have looked at these issues and they're not getting better lately. They actually might be worse than they were even 10 years ago. That some of this misconceptions, both in the workplace and between patients and doctors, in a sense, is not going in the right direction necessarily. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but what are some of those other kind of problems then?
Yeah, well, I think even worse that these misconceptions can lead to systemic issues that prevent your Muslim patients from getting the care that they deserve too, right? The provider biases. So some myths that you might have heard about Muslims, maybe things like, oh, I heard you have to obtain her husband's permission, or most of them don't speak English, or don't make eye contact. That's rude in their culture. Now, another misconception we
Which is
often
not true.
see, not true.
Right.
These are all false. Now, another big misconception we see is that Muslim women or older Muslim adults don't have autonomy when it comes to making decisions about their healthcare. Now, what that leads to is situations where clinicians think they should address the male figure in the room, whether that's that patient's husband or brother or 14-year-old son, right? And they're turning to him because they think, oh, this is the person of authority. And they're not allowing the patient to make those decisions for herself, which is ironic because you're creating the situation that's wrong.
The situation that you said is a problem to you as a non-Muslim American, for example,
Yeah.
physician, you are now promoting.
Promoting it,
By your
exactly.
misunderstanding and misconceptions.
Exactly.
You're actually aggravating the situation.
Exactly. And our own lack of understanding and tendency to stereotype leads to those situations where our patients are not receiving the care that they deserve. And it can lead to situations where a patient who has full capacity is not even being spoken to about their decisions. And obviously that's dangerous, right? Like we're not even understanding what our patients want or how they want their care to proceed. And I think that's scary.
Yeah, and I can imagine that as a pediatrician who makes so much effort to involve my children at an age-appropriate level as they grow up, that if I took that approach, I would be creating a dynamic with my Muslim patients from childhood.
Yeah.
That I am actually empowering a very negative sense of themselves as they're growing up and how they should interact with me as their doctor.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very important and, again, very eye-opening. And any other things we should know about in terms of kind of myths or false truths?
I think for false truths, that's pretty much the brunt of it. I think those are the key areas. Though I think there are a few things that we can do to help like our physician colleagues be a little bit more comfortable and accommodated for in their workplaces.
And I think that's exactly where I wanted to go with this is because, again, 10, 15% of physicians or dentists or pharmacists, as you know, are Muslim Americans. And, what are some of the things that we as colleagues should be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked a little bit about prayer earlier. I wanted to go back to that actually. So as Muslims, we have 5 daily prayers that are prescribed upon us, and they're spread throughout the day. It has to do with the timing of the sun and things like that. Now, typically, we need about 10 minutes to wash up before the prayer and then to perform it in a clean, private, quiet space. Now, many trainees, like residents, attendings, students, may not feel comfortable taking that 10-minute break to go and perform their obligatory prayer for a variety of reasons, right? You might be in the middle of clinic hours. You may need to unscrub from like a very long procedure and then come back if possible. You may need someone to cover for your patients for a few minutes. Or you might just not have a quiet, clean space that you can use. Now, some of the things that we can do to help this situation is, right, during orientation, if you are someone who's in a position of power, whether you're the supervisor, the attending physician, or the office person, or whoever it is to let trainees know that they are more than welcome to step away from their obligations for those few minutes if they would like to go perform their prayers, if they choose to. Now, the reason why I say it's really wonderful if someone actually says it first rather than the trainee having to ask for it is because you're opening that door for them, right? You're saying it's okay. Like we would give anyone a 30-minute period to at least eat their lunch or take a break, whatever it is throughout the day. So why is it that this person can't use that break in these short fragments of 10 minutes whenever they need for their prayers?
Break, use it as you choose.
Use it as you choose. Right. And kind of like, opening up that window like, hey, it's okay. I understand. We have a busy day ahead. If at some point you need to step away, like, please do so. Like, I want you to feel like you can do that. And you can go the extra mile by providing them with like a designated space, whether that's even your own office and, you're willing to step away from it for a few minutes, or whether it's a conference room that's not being used, or usually most hospitals have a chapel. So even on the first day of orientation, just kind of showing the students and the residents where that's located and how they can use it. It can be really helpful and welcoming for your colleagues.
I think we see that in at least in our area with patients of the Jewish faith, and we understand that they may step away and pray outside or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's not that much different. It's just we seem to have created this false differential somehow between Christianity, Judaism, and Muslim faith.
Yeah.
But the truth is they share a lot
in
common, and we just have to be open to all of that, not just, kind of create a niche for only a handful of people.
Absolutely. They're all Abrahamic faiths and there is a lot of overlap. And I think people are often surprised. I have a quick funny story that I've often been approached, sometimes when people are promoting their own faith, whether they're doing like tabling or flyers and things like that, or they come knocking on your door. One time I happened to be in the parking lot of a grocery store and a man approached me with flyer in hand and he was like, hello. Can I talk to you for a minute? And I was like, oh, okay, sure. And he goes, do you believe in Jesus Christ? And I said, yes, I do. And at that moment, he was stunned. He goes, wait, really? And obviously, I'm someone who wears a hijab, looks evidently Muslim, or someone who's not of his own faith, I guess. And he was stunned in that moment. He was like, wait, really? What religion are you? And I said, I'm Muslim. And he's like, oh, I had no idea you guys believe in Jesus too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we spent the next 10 minutes of me explaining what Islam is. And I don't think I got as much information back from him, but it was a very educational
experience. Good for him. And I think that he came probably with his own little spiel that he wanted to do, and he walked away enriched as well. I think that's the beauty of these conversations. Yeah. But I think it's somewhat a shame that we have to explain that because we have created such a different narrative about the Muslim faith that people are surprised when they hear something like that. You're going, wait a second, 2,000 years, that's been what it's been. Why are you not aware of this? And that's a whole nother level
Absolutely.
Of why they're not. But correct, the idea that, yes, we believe Jesus was a prophet just as much as you do, but not necessarily the prophet. Mm-hmm. That's the difference. But of course we believe, and we believe he may come back.
Yeah.
Really? And it's that commonality, I think, that could bind us a lot more than those who want to use this to separate us.
Absolutely.
In our lives outside of a profession and obviously professionally as well. So you talk about creating spaces, I can imagine, for our doctor colleagues, our physician colleagues, healthcare colleagues, and perhaps even our patients who are Muslim. Yep. We're sitting there waiting for a doctor's visit and prayer comes up, or something, or some procedure. What other things should we be aware of amongst our colleagues to be sensitive to?
Yeah, sure. So we talked a little bit about Ramadan as well before. We were talking about how we're fasting from food during that time. We're fasting from coffee, from water, gum, and basically anything by mouth from before the sun rises to sunset. Now, this month can be something that is difficult for our trainees, especially while we're on inpatient services. Now, truthfully, it's mostly because inpatient services are tough on anybody, right? We're arriving before the sun rises. We're leaving at like 8 or 9 o'clock. You're running around all day, performing procedures, doing codes. You're in clinic back to back. You're feeling thirsty from speaking so much. So one thing during Ramadan that you can offer both to either your colleagues or, your supervisor or whatever can offer is that if your Muslim trainees choose to be on night float that month, right? Because almost no one wants to do night float, but maybe your Muslim colleagues might. Because while we're fasting during the day, we're able to eat during those night hours and we're feeling fresh and we're drinking our coffee. And, I think anyone can agree a doctor who is sustained nutritionally and caffeinated is a better doctor than one who is not.
Again, very obvious when you say it.
Yeah.
Kind of like, okay, that's a no-brainer. That does make sense.
It makes sense, right? And I want to reinforce here that don't assume that your Muslim colleagues want that. At least ask them, do you want to be on night float? I think this might be beneficial for you. Some of them might not. Some of them might prefer to, struggle.
But it's a discussion you can have with your colleagues, your students. And
absolutely.
when you're all working together in a hospital or practice, at least this is a conversation you can have.
Yes.
That is meaningful and sensitive and allows everybody to represent that side of their lives in their professional lives.
Absolutely. And it gives them a chance to practice their beliefs and be able to participate in the spiritual month and not get lost in those busy, hours of the workday. And still be able to contribute as like a good provider. And I think the only problem we would run into by having this conversation is that maybe every resident wants to switch their schedule with the Muslim colleague.
It happens in the other faiths, and we see that all the time let's be honest, between the Christian and the Jewish faith, our holidays, we swap. And there's a religion that's just as old, and it's time that gets its due, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I can't remember a day that my mom has been home on Christmas Day. She has always been willing to work Christmas Day for her colleagues and, whatever holiday that they ask for. But that's another thing too, holidays, right? We only really have 2 major holidays as Muslims, but usually they're not recognized by workplaces or schools. New York State's doing a better job. I believe schools actually in this state do receive either a day off or some sort of acknowledgement. But I think, again, it's about that representation, right? I feel like had I had a Muslim teacher growing up who, just decorated our classroom during the month of Ramadan, just little stuff like that made us feel like seen and heard. And, this isn't just my life at home, but this is something that I can practice in my everyday life everywhere, I think that would have been so impactful. So yeah, just that acknowledgement. I know sometimes I try to take initiative and when it's Ramadan, I'll bring in snacks and things and be like, oh, please break fast with me or, things like that to kind of at least acknowledge it and share, when I'm celebrating. But it would be nice to.
I think that brings a story to my mind of my father when we were in Egypt and during Ramadan.
Oh, wow.
And I think, even in his elder years, it was one of those wonderful moments where, as the end of the fast that evening through the market that we were walking through sounded, literally all of the tents and everything, the doors closed on all the shops in this beautiful kind of almost percussionist, boom, everything dropped. And then the rugs came out and the food came out, and they looked over as we were there, kind of taken by surprise, in all honesty. And my father's like, what's going on? And I said, the fast is broken today. He goes, oh. And somebody looks up at him and says, please sit down and join us.
Oh.
And the smile across, his face, a man who always liked food. But to just realize that was part of this, to share that moment, it bridged that. I can imagine that happening at work. Like you said, bringing it in. I mean, to not do it, it's almost like we're missing out here.
Yeah.
Some of that cross-cultural
Yeah.
that we could have that makes us who we are.
Yeah.
So that's what we're supposed to be proud of. I still remember that smile ear to ear going, really? Is it
Yeah.
okay? I'm like, yeah, you better not say no. They want you to sit down, and we should. And it was
Yeah.
wonderful.
Absolutely. I think sharing our celebrations definitely helps kind of bridge, making people aware, right? Like it's no one's fault that they're not aware. We're lucky it's on the calendar, even in a common calendar. But unfortunately, it would be nice to get a little bit more acknowledgement, whether it's from our educational programs or in schools or workplaces, whatever it is. If not a day off, to at least, acknowledge that some of your colleagues might celebrate this. I was on my surgery rotation when one of the Eids had happened at the beginning of summer last year. And my mom was visiting me here in New York. And so she had made biryani, which is like one of my favorite foods. It's this Hyderabadi dish of rice and lamb and just full of flavor and
If
everything.
you haven't had it, please don't, hold back.
Yeah.
It's just one of those wonderful experiences in life. Just the smell of it coming through the room. Yeah.
Man, yeah, it's the best. So my mom had came, and my mom's funny in the way that she makes biryani. She only knows how to make it in industrial quantities. So even though there was 3 of us, she made enough for like the entire community. And so I took some in for our surgical residents that I was working with, and they were the happiest people ever. It was like I made their week with this biryani. And it was special because, it gave me an opportunity to talk to them and answer questions that they had, because otherwise maybe we wouldn't have acknowledged what is Eid or why are you celebrating today. And a lot of them were like, why are you at work today? Shouldn't you have off? And I was like, I don't mind working today, but I'm glad I got to share this experience with you.
Absolutely. Sit around the table where the best conversations happen. I always say the bonfires and the table. So these are really good and important ideas for our patients, for our colleagues to be aware of and sensitive to. Yeah, and I think the very important and very basic, actually, ways of doing this. We're not talking about turning the world upside down or changing things dramatically to be sensitive to these issues. Leads me to that whole idea that a lot of the leaders in the Muslim American community are saying, look, if we don't come out and have this discussion, this is going in a very bad direction. Not only are we going to lose people going into certain fields. We may lose physicians altogether.
Yep.
People may decide not to go into it, which is something that culturally, belief-wise, we believe in medicine. We're a very ancient culture that believes in healthcare, and now this is a deterrent to us unless we address this issue. And I know a lot of what the community is doing, and one of my readings have said, some talking to people, that they are getting out and really being advocates for having this discussion about diversity early on in education of healthcare, so that it's a lot smoother transition than some of these dramatic examples that you've given. It why does that have to happen that way? Why can't it be part of how we're all educated in cultural sensitivity and diversity? And you use the example of not just to be sitting there and represent everybody on some type of photo card, but to really promote not just a part we want to take from their culture and say, well, that belongs to us in our field or in America, but we want all of what you represent to be part of this fabric.
Absolutely. And absolutely. And we're only able to have these conversations when we have more people at the table, right, of those diverse backgrounds, because it's not just the color of their skin that they're bringing to the table. It's not just that the food that they eat or the beliefs that they have, but it's that whole person that brings that diverse set of perspectives. And like I said, when my own relatives are looking for a provider, that's what they're thinking of, right? They're like, I want someone who gets me, the unspoken things, right? Like, do they understand? One thing I actually want to talk about today was vaccine hesitancy, actually, right? So, for example, we see people being vaccine hesitant for a variety of reasons. Some people, especially during the pandemic, were worried that there wasn't enough research on certain vaccines, or they were concerned about the ingredients in them and things like that. But one thing that I started thinking about, especially in the Muslim population, is that some people might think of the HPV vaccine as something that it's not, right? So the HPV vaccine is used to prevent cancers that are induced by a virus. So typically we're thinking about like cervical cancer. Now, we usually give it to girls and just young teenagers, essentially, right? So kids like around when they're 12 years old or so, they start receiving this vaccine. Now, because we know that this virus tends to be spread through sexual activity, what it can be misinterpreted as is that, by giving my kid the HPV vaccine, you're the doctor or me, I'm giving my kid the green card, opening the door for them now to be sexually active, which obviously as their provider, we don't want, or, whatever they choose to do. But like, we're not encouraging that per se by giving this
part of
vaccine.
that dynamic,
That
but
is
it becomes part of it when we're ignorant to the implications.
Yes. And, we don't think about how people might choose to be sexually abstinent, whether that's for cultural reasons, religious reasons, or their personal choice, right? But when we don't think about that aspect, and now I think about it, right? If I see a patient who comes in and they might be vaccine hesitant, I will probe them. I will ask, may you tell me a little bit more about why you feel uncomfortable about receiving this
Not
vaccine?
what you think, but why you think.
Why, right? And maybe we can address the issue, because if someone told me something like that, like, oh, I'm vaccine hesitant because I don't want my kid to have, sex yet, I'd be like, totally understand. I hear you. The purpose of this vaccine is to prevent the cancers that can happen from spreading that virus, right?
And I will
it
make
works
sure that this is clear when I speak to your
to your
daughter or
child.
your son now, to
Yeah.
make sure that that comes out clearly.
That comes out
your
clearly.
your wishes are also represented.
Exactly. And, we need to inform them and educate them that this vaccine actually works best when we give it before anyone is ever sexually active, right? So we can prevent things. It doesn't really have much effect when someone is already infected. So at that point, having that opportunity to educate them, you're really utilizing that moment, right? Instead of missing the mark, and essentially you'll have a kid who grows up never getting such an important vaccine, unfortunately, if we don't take that extra second to think about why.
Another good example of the implications of this approach to diversity in culture and backgrounds, that if we don't do this, also the clear implication is we all lose out as physicians, being able to provide the health benefits that we are trained to do, and that's the service we enter to do that. And if we find that there are roadblocks to compliance or other reasons because we don't understand, then we're not able to do what we want to do and believe we're here to do for our patients, and then for our colleagues, opening doors instead of closing doors onto them, certain avenues. The idea that if we're not sensitive to these things and build these into our education and our understanding, we all lose somehow.
Absolutely.
And I think that's an important theme I see in a lot of the discussions we're having in the podcast, is that to open these dialogues is a win-win. It's not just we're having this discussion for Muslim Americans.
Yep.
We're not having this discussion for, women or men or people of different gender preferences. This is an implication in terms of race and everything that we all benefit from. That's the point of who we are as a people. And if we're going to pursue this health and get there, we better bring this into the dynamic, or we're not getting there.
Absolutely.
So in that last question we ask everybody, how would you summarize that pursuit of health from the point of view of a young Muslim American physician? And I just want to say American and not categorized, because I think that's another issue we all have. But I think it's important also not to pretend we're there yet, that we can do that. But it'd be wonderful to be there someday. But what does that mean to you in the work that you're already begun and plan to do?
Absolutely. So I think indirectly we've been talking a lot about patient-centered care, right? So I just want to define what that term really means to me, and I think what it generally means to the healthcare systems, because we're often told this in hospitals and wherever we work, like, we want to focus on patient-centered care. What does that mean? Essentially, it means that every single person who's taking care of a patient is looking at each individual person as someone who comes with a set of unique cultural, religious, spiritual, whatever background that they have. And that background influences how they make decisions for themselves, including the ones about their healthcare, right? So I think, to me, the pursuit of health is, what can I do for this patient to make them feel empowered so that they can take an active role in their care and navigate the healthcare system? And I think it's important to take initiative where you see that it's needed. And I often tend to think that, we need to make the changes we want to see, because if not me, then who? If not now, then when?
Right, absolutely. And to ignore it just perpetuates or condones the lack of advocacy and the lack of being proactive. It's like, well, it's okay. We won't just address that. The status quo will never change.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Very important. I always love the answers to that question, and it just builds a dynamic, I think, and a foundation for getting up and moving forward. I hope people feel the same energy after this discussion that I do. It's like, oh, I want to get out there. I want to have this discussion with my friends, and I want to bring it forward and carry it forward. And I hope that people sense that energy here, because I'm really picking this up. It's been a wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
And the idea that I want to do like that person who accosted you in the parking lot and say, I can imagine them going, did you know? And just sharing all the stuff they learned. And I think that is the contagious nature of the work you're doing. I think it's very important. I know you're also heading towards and already participating in the military career as well as part of your medical career, and that as a sense of an envoy to us. And I see the connections there and really appreciate the work there that you do and will be doing. And I think we have to honor that. We have to take these messages forward, and I hope our audience will do that, and hope this gives a platform for more of this to happen, because it's very exciting and very important. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure.
Wonderful.
I really enjoyed this discussion with Simal Ali, and I hope you got the sense that she's a very bright star early on in her career who sees the broad implications of healthcare for all of us, especially if we acknowledge and enhance the diversity that makes America so particularly unique and the healthcare system potentially so exceptional. Again, she brought some very simple ideas that we can all bring into our lives and apply in healthcare, not just for Muslim Americans, but across the board, to be sensitive to our patients and to each other, and to essentially do what we learned in medical school. Look at each individual as a person with their own background, patient-centered care. Not something we just give lip service to, but something we actually practice. I really believe that this is an important dynamic, and I'm so glad that our next generation is already thinking about this. I look forward to your comments on this topic and past topics or future topics you'd be interested in. We can be reached at Dr. Fetke MD on Facebook and Instagram. That's DrFethkemD, or on our website, drfetkemd.com. Until next time, sit down, listen to each other, get to learn about our differences and what we also have in common. I'm Dr. Fetke MD, wishing you well in all your pursuits.